Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into one of the wildest, most sudden whiplash moments in U.S. history. We're going to look at the incredible, rapid rise and the seriously mysterious end of America's 12th president, Zachary Taylor. This is the story of a guy who stepped straight off a dusty battlefield and directly into the highest office in the land, right smack in the middle of one of the most volatile periods in American history.
And it all centers around one massive question. Was his death a sudden illness or a calculated conspiracy? Right? It's a mystery that has baffled historians for over a century and a half. Picture this. You've got a celebrated war hero, a man with absolutely zero political background who somehow becomes president of the United States. He takes power when the country is quite literally tearing itself apart. And then, just as he's making his most controversial decisions, he drops dead. So was it just a tragic random illness? Or, as a whole lot of people suspected at the time, did his political enemies pull off a calculated assassination? Let's get into it.
Section 1. A mysterious July 4th death.
To really grasp how shocking this was, I want you to imagine you're a close aide to the president. You're standing right beside him in Washington, D.C. on a completely scorching, sweltering Independence Day in 1850. The president is out in the blazing sun attending holiday celebrations at the Washington Monument. Naturally, he's seeking relief from the intense heat, so he consumes a whole lot of iced water, cold milk, and huge bowls of cherries. Just a few hours later, your team is in absolute panic. He develops a severe fever and agonizing stomach cramps. Over the next few days, you watch helplessly as his condition just plummets. On July 9, 1850, literally 5 days after the symptoms started and barely a year into his term, he's dead. The suddenness completely shocked the nation, and as you can probably guess, whispers of foul play started almost instantly.
But to understand why people jumped straight to murder, we need to look at the rise of a war hero. How did this guy even end up in the White House?
Born in Virginia way back in 1784, Taylor was essentially a farm boy who much preferred horses and weapons over sitting down with a book. He was drawn to military life early on, entering the U.S. Army as an officer in 1808. He spent decades just grinding it out, building a solid reputation as a fierce, capable soldier. But 1846 was a total game-changer. He led forces in the Mexican-American War, and the massive popularity he gained from that conflict is exactly what propelled him to be inaugurated as the 12th president in 1849.
Let's talk about that war for a second, because during that 1846 turning point, Taylor served as a key general for the U.S. Army. And honestly, the man was a tactical genius. He repeatedly won major battles against opposing forces that were way, way larger than his own. The absolute crown jewel of his career? The Battle of Buena Vista. His smaller, heavily outnumbered army pulled off a miraculous defeat against the Mexican forces. It was the kind of legendary victory that instantly turns you into a national icon.
And it wasn't just his battle record. People loved his character. He earned the famous nickname Old Rough and Ready. Why? Well, unlike a lot of flashy, high-ranking officers at the time, Taylor lived super simply. He shared the exact same harsh, gritty camp conditions as his ordinary enlisted soldiers. This humble, boots-on-the-ground lifestyle made him a massive hero to the American public. In fact, he was so wildly popular that the Whig Party drafted him for the 1848 election. And get this, he was a seasoned politician. Well, actually, scratch that. He had zero political experience. He had literally never even voted in a presidential election before.
So he rides this immense wave of popularity right into the Oval Office. But the country he's now leading? It's a complete ticking time bomb. Let's look at the slavery powder keg.
The intense political climate he inherited was completely dominated by one explosive issue known as the Great Debate. See, following the war, America had acquired massive new Western territories from Mexico, and the burning question tearing the nation apart was, will these newly acquired territories be allowed to permit slavery? The northern states were fiercely opposed to the expansion of slavery into these new lands, while the southern states strongly demanded it. The tension was at an absolute boiling point.
Which brings us to the great paradox of his presidency. It's kind of fascinating. On one hand, Taylor was a Southerner who personally owned enslaved people. Because of this, Southern leaders just assumed he'd be their guy, right? They figured he'd naturally side with them and protect the expansion of slavery. Yet above all else, he was a fierce Union defender. As a career soldier who had spent his whole life fighting for the United States, he strongly opposed any Southern states that wanted to secede or break away to protect slavery. He prioritized the unity of the entire nation way above his own regional and personal background.
And he didn't mince words about it either. He flat out threatened to use the military if any state tried to secede. He essentially looked Southern leaders in the eye and told them that if they rebelled against the Union, he would personally lead the army down there and hang them as traitors. Wow. This iron-fisted stance completely alienated his own political base and created some incredibly powerful enemies who felt utterly betrayed. You can definitely see how these enemies suddenly had a very, very strong motive to want him out of the picture.
Okay, so with motives piling up, let's jump back to those sweltering days of his collapse and start investigating the medical theories.
Inside the White House, the paranoia was just off the charts. Two main theories of his demise emerged pretty much instantly. First up, the poisoning theory. Because Taylor was fiercely blocking the Southern pro-slavery agenda and threatening actual military action, rumors spread like wildfire that his political enemies assassinated him. Specifically, people thought they slipped poison, like arsenic, into his milk or cherries at that July 4th event to permanently stop his unionist agenda. The alternative was the official diagnosis. Medical professionals of the time stated he died from cholera morbus, or acute gastrointestinalis. Basically, a sudden, severe intestinal illness triggered by the specific food he ate, the extreme heat, and the notoriously terrible open sewer sanitation in 1850s Washington, D.C.
So what does the science actually say about all this? Well, decades of historical evidence and later investigations found absolutely no solid proof of poisoning. In fact, to finally settle this debate once and for all, Taylor's remains were exhumed in the 1990s and tested by modern forensic scientists. They meticulously looked for traces of arsenic and other heavy metal poisons, and what did they find? The levels were completely normal, nowhere even close to a lethal dose. So, despite those highly compelling political motives for an assassination, the historical and scientific investigations ultimately support the official diagnosis. The cause remains a severe, naturally occurring illness.
So the conspiracy theories have been put to rest, but the impact of his super short presidency? That definitely hasn't. Let's look at the soldier's final legacy.
Zachary Taylor left a really unique historical mark. He served a very brief 16 months in office, yet he's remembered for immense battlefield bravery, and maybe even more importantly, for taking extreme political risks to keep the country united. He was fully willing to fight his own allies and go against his personal interests for the sake of the Union. He remains one of the few figures in American history who transitioned straight from the battlefield to the White House, bringing a soldier's blunt, no-nonsense sense of duty right into a slick politician's world.
As the saying goes, some leaders rise through politics, others rise through war. Zachary Taylor's story is much less about traditional backroom politics, and way more about raw duty, courage, and standing totally firm in the face of immense pressure. His time in office might have been incredibly short, and his death shrouded in mystery for over a century, but his hardcore commitment to a united nation remains a seriously powerful chapter in our history.
And it leaves us with one of history's greatest what-ifs. How would American history have changed if this war hero had survived his term to lead a divided nation? Would his strict military threats have actually prevented the Civil War, or would they have just sparked it a decade early? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today as we explored the rapid rise and sudden fall of Old Rough and Ready. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.